My mother-in-law slid a check across the gravy boat, her diamond rings catching the dining room light. $50,000, Clara, she whispered, her voice dripping with synthetic pity. Sign the divorce papers, leave our son, and you can finally pay off your military debts. My father-in-law didn't even look up from carving the turkey, treating my entire existence like a messy chore they were paying to clean up. They thought I was just a broke, struggling army captain with nothing to my name but mud on my boots and a pile of student loans. They had no idea that the sleek digital tablet resting in my bag by the front door held a secret that would reduce their precious family empire to absolute ashes. I let them finish talking, smiled warmly, and slid my tablet across the table, showing them a screen that would change everything. My name is Clara Ward, and at 33 years old, I've spent the last decade of my life learning that the most dangerous battles aren't always fought on a muddy field halfway across the world. Sometimes, the most brutal warfare takes place over fine china in a room that smells of lavender and old money. For 5 years, I've been an active-duty Army captain, a career that has given me purpose, discipline, and a deep appreciation for things that cannot be bought. But to my husband Logan's family, the elite Prescotts, I was nothing more than an embarrassing stain on their pristine social fabric. The Prescotts made their massive fortune in commercial real estate, developing luxury high-rises and retail empires across the state. They lived in a world of country clubs, private galas, and quiet, devastating arrogance. To them, my modest military salary was a joke, and my dedication to my country was a foolish waste of time. A glorified government employee, my mother-in-law Victoria would sigh loudly at family gatherings, making sure her friends heard. It's such a shame Logan didn't marry someone with actual ambition. They constantly pressured Logan to leave me, whispering in his ear that a real partner would help him elevate his social standing, not drag him down with mud on her boots. Every dinner with them was an exercise in survival, a barrage of passive-aggressive comments about my cheap jewelry, my lack of designer clothes, and my demanding schedule. They looked at my uniform with disgust, treating my service like a hobby I'd eventually have to outgrow. They wanted me gone, and they were willing to wait for the perfect moment to strike. They thought I was weak because I chose to stay quiet. They had no idea I was just observing. Then, the world shifted. My grandfather, Arthur Ward, passed away quietly in his sleep. He was a retired military veteran who had lived a remarkably simple life in a modest, rustic cabin in the woods. To everyone who knew him, including my snobbish in-laws, he was just a sweet, eccentric old soldier living off a meager pension. Victoria had actually laughed when I told her I was taking leave for his funeral, muttering that she hoped he hadn't left me his collection of rusted pocket knives. But a week after the funeral, I was summoned to a private, high-end law office downtown. I fully expected to sign some basic paperwork for his modest cabin. Instead, the elderly attorney handed me a secure, encrypted digital drive. As it turned out, my grandfather was not just a retired soldier. He had been a brilliant, highly successful defense contractor and a quiet land investor who had spent decades acquiring commercial properties under various private holding companies. When the attorney read the final numbers, my breath caught in my throat. I had inherited a massive, diversified portfolio worth exactly $8.5 million. I sat in that quiet office, tears stinging my eyes, utterly stunned by the sheer magnitude of what my grandfather had built. But along with the financial statements, there was a final handwritten note from him. It read, "Clara, never let people know the size of your pocketbook. It is the only way to see who loves you for who you are and who loves you for what you can give them." In that moment, a cold clarity washed over me. I decided to keep the inheritance a completely absolute secret from my husband's family. I wanted to see exactly how far the greedy Prescotts would go to destroy a broke soldier like me now. Months passed quietly. I went back to my military duties, waking up at dawn, running drills, and living in our modest rented apartment. I didn't touch a single dime of my grandfather's fortune, keeping it safely tucked away in my private accounts. The Prescotts, of course, mistook my silence and frugal lifestyle for sheer financial desperation. They assumed I was drowning under the weight of my military debts and grief. Then, out of nowhere, Victoria sent an invitation. It was a lavish, gold-embossed card inviting me to their grand Thanksgiving dinner in Granite Bay. She even called me, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, claiming she wanted to make amends and finally celebrate as a unified family. It was a sudden, jarring shift from her usual cold shoulder. But I knew better than to trust a Prescott bearing gifts. The real red flag was Logan. In the days leading up to the holiday, my husband was an absolute pacing, nervous wreck. He barely slept and couldn't look me in the eye. After a quiet, tearful confrontation, the truth slipped out. His parents had been whispering in his ear for weeks. They had issued a brutal, silent ultimatum. If he didn't end his marriage to me, they would completely cut him off from the family trust. He was terrified, caught between his love for me and the luxury lifestyle he had always known. But he didn't know I already had a plan. The dining room in Granite Bay was suffocatingly grand. The scent of roasted turkey was masked by the overwhelming perfume of Victoria's expensive white lilies. Sitting at the long mahogany table, surrounded by glistening crystal and heavy silver, I felt like a target in their sights. The passive-aggressive jabs started before the first glass of wine was poured. Victoria made a show of looking at my hands, sighing. "No time for manicures in the motor pool, I suppose, Clara?" Edwin, Logan's snide uncle, chuckled, remarking how sad it was that some people spent their lives working for pennies when they could be building actual legacies. I remained perfectly calm, taking slow, deliberate bites of my food. But as soon as the main course was finished, Victoria gave a sharp nod to the serving staff. They quietly slipped out of the dining room, closing the heavy double doors behind them. The atmosphere instantly turned freezing cold. Victoria reached into her pristine designer purse, pulled out a printed marriage dissolution contract, and slid it across the table. It landed right next to the silver gravy boat. On top of it was a check. $50,000, Clara, Victoria said, her voice flat and devoid of any warmth. Sign the divorce agreement, pack your things, and leave our son. A broke captain like you can use this to pay off your military debts and start over. My father-in-law, Charles, leaned back, his eyes drilling into mine with cold contempt. Be smart, Clara. You're a soldier, but you're holding Logan back from his true potential. Take the money and walk away. You don't belong in our world, and you never will. I looked at the check, then at Logan, who sat frozen, staring at his plate. I let the silence stretch, feeling the heavy weight of their arrogance filling the room. Instead of crying, yelling, or showing a single flicker of the anger they expected, I simply let out a quiet, calm breath. I looked at the check for $50,000, then up at Victoria's smug, triumphant expression. She actually thought she had won. I reached down beside my chair, opened my tactical olive drab bag, and pulled out my sleek, heavy black tablet. I didn't say a word as I unlocked the screen and slid the glowing device smoothly across the mahogany table, letting it rest right on top of their pristine white divorce agreement. Charles frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together in confusion. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice laced with irritation. "If this is some dramatic attempt to negotiate for more money, Clara, save your breath. $50,000 is our final offer." "Look at the screen, Charles," I said softly, leaning back in my chair with the same relaxed confidence of a commander who already knows the outcome of the battle. With an impatient huff, my father-in-law pulled the tablet closer. I watched his eyes scan the glowing interface, expecting to see a counterproposal. Instead, his entire body went rigidly still. The smug sneer on his face instantly vanished, replaced by a sudden jarring look of profound confusion. On that screen were not signed divorce papers. There were live banking database portals and corporate registry records from Ward Holdings LLC. You see, my grandfather didn't just own random plots of timberland. His primary investment company owned the dominant commercial lending bank in this region, the very bank that held the massive, multi-million-dollar business loans and commercial mortgages on the Prescott's entire real estate empire. And as of last Tuesday, I was the sole owner. The power dynamic in that dining room evaporated instantly, leaving my arrogant in-laws shivering in the draft of their own impending ruin. Charles scoffed loudly, his face turning a blotchy red as he tried to regain his composure. "This is a joke," he stammered, pulling out his phone. "Ward Holdings? You think some fake bank screen is going to scare me?" He quickly dialed his lead corporate attorney, Arthur Pendleton, and put him on speakerphone, expecting a quick reassurance that would put me back in my place. "Arthur!" Charles barked into the phone, his voice shaking slightly despite his bravado. "I have my daughter-in-law here showing me some ridiculous database records claiming she owns Ward Holdings and our primary construction loans. Tell her she's delusional." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Arthur finally spoke, his voice was entirely stripped of its usual professional confidence. It sounded thin, pale, and absolutely terrified. "Charles, where did you get that information?" Arthur whispered. "If those credentials are authentic, you need to listen to me very carefully. Ward Holdings bought out our primary creditor last month. They hold 80% of your commercial debt. And worse, because of the restructuring delay we filed last week, they have the legal right to declare a technical default and recall the entire $20 million loan portfolio immediately." The phone call ended in a sudden click, but the heavy silence it left behind was absolutely deafening. Charles's hand trembled so hard his expensive phone slipped onto the table, landing right next to the cold silver gravy boat. Victoria froze completely, her fork hovering in midair as the horrifying reality crashed down upon her. The arrogant, untouchable Prescotts were suddenly staring into an absolute financial abyss. The broke army captain they had tried to casually buy out for a mere $50,000 now held the ultimate power to completely destroy their entire multi-million-dollar family legacy with a single, devastating stroke of a key. I calmly stood up, slid my heavy tablet back into my bag, and picked up Victoria's insulting $50,000 check. With a slow smile, I ripped it cleanly in half, letting the pieces flutter like confetti onto the untouched pumpkin pie. I looked at Logan. For the first time in our 5 years of marriage, he didn't look at his parents for permission. He stood up, took my hand, and walked out the grand double doors with me, leaving his pale, trembling family sitting in the quiet ruin of their dining room. I didn't recall their massive loans immediately. Instead, I simply let our bank enforce every single strict legal guideline without favoritism. Without our constant leniency, the Prescotts were forced to liquidate their prime assets, sell their Granite Bay mansion, and downsize dramatically. Logan and I stayed together, building a real life on our own terms. I used the bulk of my grandfather's millions to establish a massive housing program for homeless veterans, creating a beautiful legacy Arthur Ward would actually be proud of. Now, I'm highly curious about those of you listening to my story today. Have your in-laws or anyone else ever severely underestimated you? What would you have done if you were handed that black digital tablet? Comment below and let me know the city you are watching this from so I can see how far my story has reached. Meanwhile, I'm leaving 2 other incredible, shocking stories on the screen. Thank you so much for watching.